To them, we were a joke, weak, emotional, fragile. They laughed. Until they saw what happened next. The laughter echoed through the cold metallic halls of the Xyrixian command ship, orbiting above a desolate moon. It wasn't the warm, joyful laughter of friends, it was mocking, condescending, filled with arrogance. Commander Xyrek, a towering Xyrixian warrior, stood at the front of the observation deck, his dark crimson eyes fixed on the holographic screen. The footage displayed a group of captured human soldiers, bruised, exhausted, but still standing. Xyrek shook his head, amused. These creatures call themselves warriors? Look at them, barely able to stand after a simple endurance trial. Fragile, weak, pathetic. Behind him, a chorus of laughter followed. The young Xyrixian cadets, future warriors of their species, eagerly joined in. They had been taught since birth that humans were one of the weakest species in the galaxy. No natural armor, no claws, no venom, no regenerative abilities, nothing that made them dangerous in the eyes of the Xyrixians. No wonder they rely on machines, sneered Sub-Commander Vornax, an elite warrior known for his brutal combat style. Take away their technology, and what are they? Just soft, fleshy animals waiting to be crushed. The screen flickered, switching to a live feed from the detention area. A single human prisoner stood in the center, Daniel Carter. He was shirtless, his body covered in bruises from previous tests. His breathing was heavy, but his eyes were steady. There was no fear. No defeat. Xyrek narrowed his gaze. This one was different. Bring him forward, he ordered. The doors to the command deck hissed open, and two Xyrixian guards shoved Daniel inside. He stumbled slightly but quickly regained his balance. His gaze swept over the room, at least a dozen high-ranking alien warriors, all staring at him like he was an insect beneath their boots. Xyrek stepped forward, towering over the human. His exoskeletal armor gleamed under the artificial lights. "Tell me, human," he began, his voice dripping with mockery, "why do your kind even try? You know you cannot win against species like us. You have no natural weapons, no superior strength, no physical advantage whatsoever. So why do you fight?" Daniel exhaled slowly, rolling his shoulders despite the pain. Then, to the shock of everyone in the room, he smiled. "You think strength is just about muscles and claws," Daniel said, his voice calm. "That's why you don't understand us." The room fell silent. The laughter was gone. Xyrek frowned. "What nonsense are you talking about?" Daniel tilted his head slightly. His gaze was sharp, unwavering. "You'll see soon enough." Xyrek's irritation flared. This human had no weapons, no army, no hope. And yet, he stood here, smiling. The commander's jaw tightened. "Very well," he said coldly. "Since you seem so confident, let's put your kind to the test." A real test. Daniel didn't flinch. Xyrek turned to Vornax. "Prepare the endurance trials. We'll see how long this strength of theirs lasts before they break." Vornax grinned, his sharp teeth glinting. "With pleasure." As the guards dragged Daniel away, Xyrek watched him closely. Something about this human unsettled him. For the first time, he felt the smallest flicker of doubt. The doors of the training arena slid open with a hiss, revealing a vast, metallic chamber. The air was thick with heat, and the walls gleamed with condensation, the result of constantly shifting environmental conditions. This was the trial chamber, a proving ground where Xyrixian warriors honed their endurance. Daniel Carter stood in the center, his wrists still raw from the restraints. Around him, alien soldiers and high-ranking officers gathered on elevated platforms, their glowing eyes filled with amusement and curiosity. Xyrek stepped forward, arms crossed. "You claim your kind has strength beyond what we see," he said, his voice booming through the arena. "Very well, human. Let us put that to the test. At his signal, a heavy door rumbled open, and Vornax stepped into the chamber. The Xyrixian warrior was a living wall of muscle, his exoskeletal plates gleaming under the artificial light. He was twice Daniel's size, with a reputation for breaking lesser species in mere minutes. The crowd murmured in approval. This was going to be quick. Vornax sneered. I will enjoy this. Daniel didn't respond. He simply rolled his shoulders, taking in his surroundings. He could feel the heat rising. This wasn't just a test of strength. They were going to push him to his limits. Phase 1, the heat trial. The temperature in the room skyrocketed. Within seconds, the air shimmered, and sweat beaded on Daniel's forehead. He could feel his body working overtime to regulate itself. Vornax, unaffected by the heat, circled him. Your kind is soft, he growled. Your bodies overheat. You will collapse soon. Daniel clenched his jaw. Stay calm. Stay focused. He had trained in high-temperature conditions before. The key was pacing himself. He adjusted his breathing, controlling his movements, letting his body adapt instead of panicking. Minutes passed. Then 10. Then 20. The murmurs from the crowd grew. A human should have collapsed by now. But Daniel stood firm, his chest rising and falling steadily. Vornax's expression darkened. Enough of this. Phase 2, the cold trial. Without warning, the chamber's systems shifted. The heat vanished, replaced by an icy wind that cut through the air like a blade. Frost formed on the ground. The temperature plummeted to sub-zero levels. Daniel exhaled sharply, his breath coming out in visible puffs. His fingers stiffened, and his muscles trembled from the sudden shock. Vornax, once again unaffected, bared his teeth. Let's see how long you last now. Daniel gritted his teeth. He knew what the Xyrixians were doing: shock the body, force it to burn energy faster, weaken the will. It was a brutal endurance test meant to break weaker species. But Daniel wasn't weak. He kept his breathing steady, his mind focused. His military training had taught him how to withstand extreme cold. Keep moving. Keep the blood flowing. Don't let the body shut down. The crowd was no longer laughing. Xyrek watched in silence, his fingers tapping against the console. This human should have collapsed. But Daniel remained standing. Phase 3, oxygen deprivation. Without warning, the oxygen levels dropped. Daniel's vision blurred as his lungs screamed for air. The Xyrixians, who required much less oxygen than humans, watched expectantly. Vornax stepped closer, watching for signs of panic. Now we see the truth, he muttered. You cannot fight your biology. Daniel's mind raced. They're right. I can't overpower this. But there was one thing he could do. Control. Adapt. Endure. He forced himself to slow his breathing, conserving what little oxygen remained. He lowered his heart rate, reducing the demand for air. It was a trick taught in deep-sea diving: survive on less, extend the limit. Seconds turned into minutes. The Xyrixians shifted uneasily. No human had lasted this long in oxygen deprivation trials before. Xyrek narrowed his eyes. What is he doing? Vornax frowned. He could see it now: this wasn't luck. This was training. The human wasn't just enduring. He was managing his own body like a machine. The realization sent a ripple of unease through the crowd. What kind of species was this? The breaking point. The oxygen levels normalized. The cold dissipated. The chamber returned to standard conditions. Daniel gasped as fresh air rushed into his lungs. His body ached, but he was still standing. Vornax took a step back. His arrogance was gone. For the first time, a Xerixian warrior looked at a human and felt something unfamiliar. Doubt. Xyrek clenched his jaw. This was not what he had expected. Daniel wiped the sweat from his brow and looked straight at Xyrek. Still think we're weak? The room was silent. Then, for the first time, Xyrek didn't have an answer. The silence in the arena was deafening. Xyrek's fingers tightened into a fist as he observed the human before him. Daniel Carter was still standing, breathing hard, drenched in sweat, but unbroken. No human had ever lasted this long in the endurance trials. No one. Vornax, who moments ago had been so sure of his victory, stood frozen. His confidence had vanished. The murmuring among the Xerixian warriors grew louder. For the first time, doubt seeped into their expressions. Had they underestimated these creatures? Daniel exhaled, wiping the sweat from his brow. Then, he did something that sent a ripple of unease through the room. He laughed. It was a low chuckle at first, then a full-bodied laugh, weak, exhausted, but undeniably amused. Vornax snarled. You dare mock us? Daniel shook his head, still catching his breath. No. I'm just thinking how ironic this is. Xyrek narrowed his eyes. Explain. Daniel's smile didn't fade. He took a step forward, his voice steady despite the exhaustion. You think strength is just muscle, armor, and endurance. But real strength, real power, isn't that simple. And you don't even realize it. The murmurs grew louder. Enough riddles, human, Xyrek snapped. If you have something to say, say it. Daniel locked eyes with him. I just showed you a fraction of what we can do. But what happens when we work together? The strength of humanity. Xyrek was about to dismiss the human's words when the chamber doors hissed open. A second group of humans was led into the arena, prisoners like Daniel, battered but still walking with defiance. Xyrek frowned. Vornax scoffed. More weaklings? What difference does it make? Daniel's expression remained calm. Everything. He turned toward his fellow captives, men and women of varying ages and sizes, all bearing the same look of determination. Without a word, they moved toward Daniel, standing beside him as one. Xyrek watched closely. There was something different in the way they stood. Xerixians fought as individuals, each warrior proving their strength through their own merit. But these humans? They weren't just individuals. They were a unit. Daniel looked toward the crowd of alien warriors and spoke clearly. You've tested our bodies. But you haven't tested our minds, our ability to adapt, our teamwork. That's what makes us different. That's why you should be afraid. A tense silence filled the room. Then, a voice from the audience, one of the younger Xerixian cadets, spoke hesitantly. Commander, what if he's right? Xyrek shot the cadet a sharp glare. Silence. But the seed of doubt had been planted. The challenge continues. Xyrek had seen enough. He refused to believe that humans, these fragile, emotional creatures, could be a threat. But something inside him itched with uncertainty. Fine. If teamwork was their supposed strength, he would put it to the test. He turned to his officers. Prepare the final trial. The crowd whispered among themselves. The final trial was not just an endurance test, it was a strategic, high-stakes survival challenge. Xerixians had been bred for it. Humans? They had no chance. Daniel simply smirked. Good, he muttered under his breath. Let's show them what humans can really do. The atmosphere in the Xerixian trial chamber had shifted. The once amused expressions of the alien warriors had faded, replaced with unease. Xyrek stood rigid, his crimson eyes fixed on the group of humans before him. Something was different about them. They didn't just stand together, they moved as one. There was an unspoken understanding between them, a bond Zyrek had never seen in his own kind. But he wasn't ready to accept the idea that humans were anything more than weak, frail creatures. Not yet. With a sharp motion, he activated the controls. Begin the final trial. The floor beneath them rumbled, shifting and separating into multiple sections. Walls rose from the ground, forming an elaborate labyrinth, lined with shifting metal panels and hidden obstacles. This was the Gauntlet, a brutal, high-stakes survival test designed to push Zyrixian warriors to their limits. No weapons. No maps. Only instinct, endurance, and strategy would allow a warrior to reach the exit. Zyrek's lips curled into a smirk. Let's see how long your so-called teamwork lasts in the face of real adversity. The test begins. The humans barely had time to react before the trial started. The first challenge was an unpredictable shifting floor. One moment, they had solid ground beneath them, the next, sections of the floor collapsed, revealing jagged pits of searing heat. A Zyrixian would rely on speed, moving ahead alone. But Daniel shouted, "Stay together. Watch for the shifts." His team responded instantly. Instead of every man for himself, they moved as one. Some watched the floor patterns while others called out safe paths. They crossed the first section without losing a single member. The Zyrixian audience murmured. That wasn't supposed to happen. Trial 2, the Pursuer. Zyrek's frustration grew. Fine. Let's see them handle real danger. He activated the next phase, a mechanical beast, built to hunt and eliminate weak prey, was released into the maze. It was fast, strong, and relentless. The humans heard it before they saw it, the metallic clang of its claws against the steel walls, the echo of its synthetic growl. The instinctive reaction of any species? Run. Scatter. Hope to outrun it. But Daniel's voice cut through the panic. We don't run. We trap it. Trap it? The Zyrixians watching were stunned. A lone warrior would flee. But the humans? They set a plan in seconds. They used the shifting walls to their advantage, drawing the creature toward a section that was about to close. Timing it perfectly, they lured it in, then slammed the walls shut, trapping it in place. The audience gasped. Even Zyrek's expression darkened. Impossible. Trial 3, the ultimate test. Zyrek had seen enough. He activated the final phase, a massive chamber, flooding rapidly with water. The goal? Find the exit before drowning. This was where most species failed. Fear. Panic. Self-preservation. That's what the Zyrixians expected. But humans were different. Instead of scrambling for their own survival, they worked together. The strongest swimmers went first, scouting ahead. Others created makeshift floating platforms from debris, helping the weaker members stay above water. Daniel dove beneath the rising tide, searching for the hidden exit. The Zyrixians watched in silence. The concept was so simple, yet completely alien to them. They had trained to outlast, outfight, and overpower. But humans? They adapted. They supported each other. And against all odds, they survived. The moment that changed everything. When the humans emerged from the final test, dripping and exhausted but intact, the room was silent. Zyrek stared down at them, his mind racing. They should have failed. They should have broken. Instead, they had won. And worst of all, he had no explanation for it. Daniel looked up at him, breathing heavily, but with that same steady gaze. You wanted to see real strength, he said. Well, now you have. For the first time in Zyrixian history, their greatest warriors had nothing to say. The silence that had hung in the arena following the final trial was broken by the soft hum of the control panels. Zyrek stood motionless, his mind consumed by the unexpected reality in front of him. Humans were not the weak, fragile creatures he had believed. They had adapted. They had fought. And most shocking of all, they had won. The Zyrixians began to murmur among themselves. Some were still in disbelief, unable to comprehend what had just transpired. Others were growing concerned. There was a realization creeping into the minds of the warriors. Could humans really be a threat? Daniel Carter, despite the exhaustion weighing on him, stood tall. He exchanged glances with his fellow prisoners, those who had endured the trials with him. They had survived together, but now the real challenge lay ahead. The escape. The first step. The Zyrixian ship, while massive and advanced, was not without its vulnerabilities. Daniel and his fellow captives had been studying the ship for weeks, carefully observing its routines and systems. Their survival in the trials had given them access to critical parts of the ship. But now, it was time to act. The plan was simple: infiltrate the command center, disable the security systems, and escape. However, what appeared simple was far from it. The guards were everywhere, and the ship's maze-like design made it impossible to navigate without drawing attention. But there was one thing the Zyrixians didn't anticipate: the human ability to think outside the box. Daniel's first move was to gather his team in the holding cell. Their faces were drawn with exhaustion, but the spark of determination in their eyes remained. "We've been studying the systems. We know where the security weaknesses are. We have one shot at this. And we'll need to act fast." He looked at each of them, gauging their readiness. There was no room for error. They were about to face Zyrixian forces who had underestimated them at every turn. The unexpected ally. As the team began preparing for their escape, an unexpected figure approached Daniel from the shadows: Kales, a mid-level officer in the Zyrixian military. Daniel's hand instinctively moved to his side, where he had previously hidden a piece of scrap metal. But Kales held up his hands, signaling that he meant no harm. "I am not here to stop you," Kales said quietly. "I've been watching you." The humans stared at him in confusion. "You think we are weak? That we are nothing more than prey," Kales continued, his voice low but firm. "I thought that, too. But you have shown me something different. Something I cannot ignore." Daniel's brow furrowed. "What are you saying?" Kales stepped closer. "I'm helping you. I don't agree with Zyrek's methods. I don't agree with how we treat you. I will assist you in escaping, on one condition." The room fell silent as the humans exchanged wary glances. "What condition?" Daniel asked, his voice tight. "Show the galaxy that humans are not to be underestimated." Kales' eyes were filled with a mixture of hope and defiance. "And that Zyrixian arrogance comes with a price." Daniel hesitated, then nodded. "You have a deal." The plan unfolds. The escape plan began to take shape. With Kales' insider knowledge, the humans had access to the ship's communication systems. They disabled the security cameras, locked down the exits, and set the stage for a daring escape. Every move had to be timed perfectly. Every second counted. The ship's systems would only stay offline for so long before the alarms were triggered. Daniel, Kales, and the others navigated the corridors, slipping past patrols. The moments of tension were palpable: every corner could hide a guard, every shadow could mean disaster. As they neared the control room, they heard footsteps echoing down the hall. "Move!" Daniel hissed. They ducked into a nearby maintenance closet, holding their breath as the Zyrixian guards walked by. Their hearts pounded in their chests, but their eyes never wavered from the goal ahead, the control room. Kales led the way. He punched in a series of codes, bypassing security measures that would have been impossible for the humans to crack on their own. Finally, the door to the command center slid open. They were in the confrontation. As they entered the heart of the ship, they found themselves face to face with the one person who had orchestrated their trials, the one who had deemed them weak, unworthy, and disposable. Zyrek. His towering form loomed in front of them, his eyes cold with fury. "You think you can escape?" Zyrek's voice was low, dangerous. "You are nothing. Your kind is nothing." Daniel stepped forward, meeting his gaze head-on. "We've already shown you that we're not weak. And now, we'll show you just how far we'll go to protect what's ours." Zyrek's lips curled into a sneer. "You've won your little trials, but this is where it ends. You cannot defeat me." But what Zyrek didn't understand was that this wasn't about defeating him, it was about proving a point. With Kaylee's help, the humans had managed to disable the ship's internal communication systems, isolating Zyrek and his forces. In that moment, it was clear, the battle was no longer between individuals. It was about something much larger. Humanity's strength wasn't just physical. It was about their resilience, their ability to work together, and their unwavering will to survive. The air inside the Zyrexian command center was thick with tension, the walls of metal vibrating with the sounds of the ship's engines as they approached the edge of enemy territory. Daniel stood at the forefront, facing Zyrek, his heart racing not from fear, but from the immense weight of the situation. This wasn't just about escaping anymore. It was about surviving. It was about proving that humanity had the strength to face overwhelming odds and still come out victorious. But Zyrek wasn't backing down. His face twisted into a sneer, his towering form a reminder of the alien forces behind him. "You think you've won?" Zyrek's voice was cold and cutting, like a blade. "You are nothing but insects. No matter how many times you overcome my trials, you will never be more than that." Daniel took a step forward, his voice steady despite the pressure. "We don't need to be more than insects to beat you. We just need to be human." Zyrek's eyes narrowed. "Humanity will fall. You will be crushed, just like every other weak species that thought they could stand against us." But before Zyrek could continue, a voice interrupted. It wasn't from any of the humans, but from Kaylee's, the once loyal officer who had helped them. "Enough, Zyrek." All eyes turned to Kaylee's as he stepped forward. The tension in the room grew thicker, if that was even possible. Daniel's heart pounded as he watched the exchange. Had Kaylee's betrayed them? Was this the moment they had all feared? But to Daniel's surprise, Kaylee's didn't turn to the humans. He wasn't looking at them. He was staring at Zyrek, his voice filled with defiance. "I've been watching you. I've seen your cruelty, your arrogance. And I've seen what these humans can do. They're more than just warriors, they're something we've never understood. They've shown me that strength comes in forms we've overlooked." Zyrek's eyes flashed with rage. "You dare betray me?" Kaylee's met his gaze with unwavering resolve. "No. I'm not betraying you. I'm standing against you. And I'll stand with them. Because I believe in their strength." The silence that followed was deafening. The Zyrexian soldiers around them exchanged uneasy glances, unsure of where their loyalty now lay. Zyrek's face was twisted in fury, but even he had to acknowledge the truth that Kaylee's had spoken. For the first time in his life, Zyrek hesitated. The final stand. Daniel could feel the shift in the atmosphere. The tension between the Zyrexian officers was palpable, and for a brief moment, it seemed like Zyrek didn't know whether to lash out or to retreat. The moment of indecision gave the humans an opening. Daniel didn't hesitate. "We have to move, now." Kaylee's nodded sharply, quickly moving to the command center's control panel. The others followed suit, with a few staying behind to cover their escape. The plan had always been to take control of the ship's communication systems, to cut off Zyrek's ability to call for reinforcements. But before they could execute their plan, Zyrek roared in fury, his fist slamming into a nearby console. "You think you can escape? You think you can beat me?" He raised his arm, and the ship's main alarms began to blare, signaling a full-scale lockdown. The doors to the control room sealed shut with a hiss. "Now you will pay for your insolence," Zyrek shouted. "You are mine." The humans were trapped. The walls around them were closing in, and the sound of armored Zyrexian soldiers advancing down the halls grew louder. There was no turning back. The moment of truth had arrived. Daniel exchanged a quick glance with Kayleigh. "Can you hold them off long enough?" Kayleigh nodded grimly. "We don't have a choice." The final conflict. The fight was brutal. The Zyrexian warriors charged forward, their claws and weapons gleaming. Daniel and his team fought back, using their environment to their advantage. It wasn't brute strength that kept them alive, but cleverness and speed. Each movement had to count, each moment, a decision between life and death. Daniel found himself face to face with Zyrek once more. The alien commander's massive form towered over him, but Daniel didn't back down. "You don't get it, do you?" Daniel said, barely out of breath. "You think we're weak, but the truth is, we've always fought together. And that's what's going to destroy you." Zyrek's expression faltered for a moment. "What do you mean?" Daniel's eyes burned with determination. "You can destroy our bodies, you can lock us up, but you'll never break our spirit. That's what you don't understand about us." Before Zyrek could respond, Daniel rushed forward, pulling a detonator from his pocket. "This is for everyone you've ever crushed." With a single press, the command center systems exploded, sending a shockwave that rocked the entire ship. The lights flickered and alarms screamed. The ship was losing power. Zyrek let out a final, guttural roar, but it was too late. The humans had outsmarted him, turned his own technology against him. The escape. The ship lurched as power systems failed, and the escape doors opened. Daniel and his team sprinted through the collapsing corridors, with Kayleigh leading the way, cutting through the chaos. As they reached the hangar, their escape ship, one of the smaller vessels the Zyrexians had kept for themselves, was already primed for launch. The humans boarded, Kayleigh quickly sealing the doors. Before they lifted off, Daniel looked back at the wreckage they had left behind, the ship that once represented Zyrexian dominance now in chaos, crippled by a species they had never respected. Daniel turned to Kayleigh, who was sitting at the controls, his expression somber. "Thank you," Daniel said simply. Kayleigh nodded. It was the right thing to do. As the ship broke through the atmosphere and soared into the stars, Daniel glanced back one last time. They had done it. They had proven their strength. And the universe, for the first time, would never see humanity the same way again. The stars outside the ship's windows were nothing more than distant points of light, flickering in the void. But for Daniel and his team, those stars had never seemed more full of potential. As the escape ship moved further from the wreckage of the Zyrexian command vessel, the silence inside the ship felt like a quiet victory, a calm after the storm. Daniel leaned back in his seat, his eyes tired but focused. The weight of the past few days hung heavily on him. They had fought, survived, and escaped, but the journey had also taught him something that could never be taken away. Strength isn't just physical. It's not just about what you can endure on your own. It's about how far you can go for the people you care about. Kayleigh sat at the controls, looking out at the stars, lost in thought. His presence was a quiet reminder of how far things had changed. A former enemy. A former ally of Zyrek. Now he had chosen humanity's side, driven by something that had shifted in him. A belief that strength came from more than just fighting. Daniel glanced over at him. "What made you do it?" he asked quietly. Why help us? Kaylee's didn't immediately respond. The silence between them was thick with years of a war that was about to change. Finally, Kaylee spoke, his voice measured but filled with weight. It wasn't just about strength, Daniel. It was about something deeper. Something I saw in you and your people. We thought we were the only ones who understood what it meant to survive, what it meant to be strong. But I realized something when I watched you all. You don't fight just to win. You fight to protect what you believe in. Daniel's eyes softened. You saw that, didn't you? He said, almost to himself. Kaylee's nodded. I had to. And I couldn't ignore it anymore. Your kind fights not for themselves, but for each other, for everyone around them. That's what makes you dangerous. Not your physical strength, but the strength of your hearts. Daniel smiled, though it was tinged with exhaustion. It's funny, he said. We never really realized how strong we were. But we sure found out the hard way. A new beginning. The ship continued its journey into deep space, heading toward a new home, away from the wreckage of their old lives. Daniel and his team had proven the impossible, that the galaxy's strongest species could be brought down not with force, but with something far more powerful, unity, resilience, and the unyielding will to survive. But the lessons they had learned weren't just about fighting. They were about life, about knowing when to stand together and when to let go. About understanding that strength wasn't measured in victories or defeats, but in the choices you made and the people you fought for. Daniel turned his gaze to the viewport, watching the stars blur past. We've still got a lot of work to do, he murmured. But we've shown them what humans can do. And we're not stopping now. Kaylee's, who had once seen humans as weak and insignificant, now saw them in an entirely different light. I'll make sure they know, he said, his voice steady. The galaxy will know what humans can do. And for the first time, there was no mockery in his tone. There was only respect. The final lesson. As the ship sailed through the stars, Daniel thought about everything they had been through, the trials, the battles, the moments of doubt. But there was one thing that stood above all else. True strength comes not from what you can do alone, but from what you can do together. It's the bond you share, the way you uplift each other, and the way you fight for something greater than yourself. And that was the lesson that would echo throughout the universe. Humanity was not weak. They were resilient. They were capable. And no matter how many times they were pushed down, they would always rise again. Because that's what humans do.